Welcome, welcome, welcome. How are you, Dr. Joe Hamlett?
I am doing very well, Dr. Dave Peltz. How are you doing?
Most excellent, sir. We'd like to welcome our viewers and listeners to another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, where myself and Dr. Joe, the other co-host, are here to share our views and thoughts on the wisdom that we have learned and gleaned from the universe, if you will.
Absolutely. Yes.
So today's topic is on being intentional and what that means and what that looks like in the workplace for you as an individual, personally, professionally. What does that look like? So as is our normal format, one of us introduces and then immediately pitches the ball to the other guy. Joe, what are your thoughts on being intentional?
That's a very good question. So, being intentional, it's for me, being intentional didn't occur for a lot of years, I think, in my life, both professional and personally. And it really hit me as I was retiring back to almost 2 years ago now, October 20 from the military. And as I was writing my exit speech or retirement speech, it really hit me uh, what I wanted to pass on to all those airmen or all those people out there in the audience listening to me, and what bit of advice I could give them. And it came down to being intentional. And what I mean by that is, I spent almost 35 years in the military. And it wasn't until about 18, 19 years in before I became really intentional about what I wanted out of my career.
Hmm.
Right. So I went 19 years in the military, just waiting for what's next.
Going with the flow.
Yeah. Not even, thinking about how to get to the next level, how to get
Hmm.
to the next thing, what's after this. I was not thinking in those terms at all. I was just like most people, and I referred to this, many times before, the average Joe. I was just like everybody else. And I literally was, because I wasn't thinking beyond tomorrow, what's
Hmm.
going to happen to me in months, 6 months, or years. I really wasn't. And it wasn't until, I started looking at my career. Maybe it was that midlife crisis. Maybe it was that epiphany, the light bulb went off, whatever you want to call it. And that's when I realized I was starting to be really intentional about my career, which
Hmm.
also bled into, my personal life. Again, thinking about what is life going to look like for me after I retire? How is this going to look? Am I going to have any regrets and those types of things? But it wasn't, again, like I say, till I was 40 years old and reached a point in my military career where I had almost I was at a crossroads. Do I stay in beyond 20 years? But I knew at that time that I had not been intentional about my career. So if I would have got out at 20, I would have continued that non-intentional, life. And
Hmm.
and so that's why one of the reasons why I didn't get out. And like I say, that's when my intentional journey started. And from there, everybody's heard where I am today. And it all started with that intentional journey as to what's next for me. And so looks like you want to interject.
Yeah, I was going to interject. As you're describing your thought process, I started, and it was actually that, and a combination of that, and trying not to yawn on camera. So, um, but
I
I'll
guess
take that
I didn't
segue.
know I
I'll
was
take.
being that boring. So okay, go
No,
ahead. Yeah, whatever.
they
No.
say they say when you yawn, it's because you're not getting enough oxygen, which I find hard to believe because I talk so much. But a couple of pieces of imagery came into my mind when you were talking about being intentional, and one was being in a boat in a river and just going where the river and the current takes you, and versus actually paddling to a certain destination. And then when I thought of the destination piece, it reminded me of, you know, let's take a road trip. Where? I don't know.
Right.
Let's just
Yeah.
see where it goes. It's like,
Right.
did you check the air in the tires, the oil, the gas? Nope, we're just
Yeah.
gonna go. Did you pack
Yeah.
any snacks? We're going, just to see. When we run out of gas, that's where we stop. And it's like, Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because I know there's folks that are like that. Nothing against taking road trips like that. Sometimes they're fun, but when we start talking about life and our career, there does have to be some intentionality behind what we're doing, hopefully. I mean, and it does resonate with me, when you said that, the first part of your career was just kind of, for lack of better terms, just going with the river where it's taking you versus actually guiding you into different ports and getting those, broadening your experiences and knowledge and stuff like that. So,
Right. And we both have used that analogy before as far as
mhm,
getting in a car, and just driving.
mhm,
You don't set a destination. And unfortunately a lot of us do that. And I'll admit I did it for a lot of years, just not wasting living life, but was it to the fullest degree? And
mhm,
I'll say no, it wasn't, because again, I was just not even prepared for what was next for me. And
yeah,
so, and it's funny because I'd gone through my career, professional career, working at different companies where, the carpet was pulled off from under you. You're laid off, or they're moving out of state. And so having to respond to that immediately over and over again, you would have thought that I would have, develop some type of intentional plan.
mhm,
But like I say, most people don't realize it when they're going through it. You're just
yeah,
going through the motions. It's not till you take that, maybe step back or step outside of that normal routine and start taking
mhm,
a look at that. And I think that's what started happening to me. Like I say, midlife crisis, 40 years old, all those things that, a lot of people start to, at that time of their life, they start to reflect. And I think that's what started happening to me. But now, I realize that, I understand that. And so now, we talked about some of these things. When you become intentional about what you want to do, you start having to do some certain things like goal setting,
mhm.
kind of like what you said with even with the trip. Do you check the tires, those types of things? That's you got a goal. You want to go to Chicago from Kansas City. Then
But
I
if you're
need to.
driving with flat tires, it's going to take you a
Exactly.
lot
I'm not
longer
going
to
to
get
get
there.
too, yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not
you're
going to
not
get
going to get
there
there at all.
too far. So,
Yeah.
yeah, even just driving to Chicago, I have to have some type of game plan. And
Mhm.
that's where, goal setting comes into play. I've got an in state destination. Now I got to figure out how I'm going to get there. And part of it is, checking the maintenance on my car, checking routes. How much money am I going to need? Am I going to stop at hotels? So again, that simple task there is an example of being intentional about going to Chicago for
Yeah.
that road trip. And
Yeah.
so,
You're describing a lot of things that I think our viewers can resonate with. That resonates with a lot of our viewers, and, when we start talking about being intentional, it really broaches into, locus of control. There's internal locus
right,
of control and external locus of control. We've talked about this in the past. And external locus of control is something like, the weather. You cannot control the
right,
weather and whether or not it's going to rain, but you can control the internal locus of control. You can control what time you leave, whether you take a bicycle or a car when it's raining, so that sort of thing. So, yeah, the being intentional about the career piece is really important. For me, really wasn't until I was being intentional about my career that I started making some very difficult decisions. And the first one was to get out of the military the first time. There was some social and political circumstances at that time, and, I opted to get out of my term of enlistment. Needless to say, I went back in a couple more times because I was a glutton for punishment, I guess. Um, but just being intentional about your career path. And part of my being intentional about my career path was getting my college degree because I didn't want, for most of my career, I didn't, or I should say for the first half of my career, I didn't have a degree. And for me, it limited my options. So when I received my degree, when I earned my bachelor's degree, I, was able to use that as a tool. So again, that was being deliberate about getting an education to open more doors. And
Right.
Being intentional also came into play around work. Do I accept the first job that comes along, or do I wait for a better opportunity? And for those that are listening, you may be able to empathize with this. I was offered a position, and the company was actually bought out the week that, that very week. So I didn't get to start with them. They were bought out. So I had to take the next position that was offered to me. And it wasn't really what I wanted to do, but I needed to take that step. So being intentional might mean taking that step that you don't want to take, or taking that step not really realizing it's not what you wanted to do right now. And it may not be where you want to be, but you just keep doing it and you just go with the flow. Hey, I've started at ABC company. Well, I guess I'm just going to go with the flow now that I'm here. I really wanted to work for 123. So what do we do with that? Being intentional might say, well, I'm at ABC. What can I do to get into 123 company? So
So that's where I was going. I was hoping you were going to bring that up because you said this may not have been your choice, or it changed along the
yeah, it
way.
changed a little bit.
But I think you recovered, or you brought the other part of that up is you don't just go into that organization if that's not what you want to do and then just go along with the flow. It's still about, okay, I'm going to accept this for now,
Right.
but I'm still going to be intentional about how I get to where I really want to go. And
Right.
I think that that's still really important about that intentional piece, because maybe you have to sidetrack, maybe you have to sidestep, and we talk about obstacles and barriers before, but that's the point, that you're still in control. And
Yeah.
you said this offline before we came on, but that's really what it's about, still being in control of that final destination. Like you mentioned before, you can't control the weather, right? And so you just have to adjust to it. Maybe there's flash floods now on your route. You may have to take a totally different route,
Mhm.
headed to Chicago. But again, you're prepared for that. And it may take you a little bit longer to get there, but your goal, your end destination is still to get to Chicago. So
Right.
no different than in your career. If you get sidetracked, you have to go work for an organization, your end state is, I want to be at this level, if it's this organization or if it's another. So I'm really glad that you were headed down that path. I thought where you're saying we just stay there, but I should have known you weren't going to continue down that path. But I'm just glad you brought that up, because even though things get in our way, just still, if you're intentional about it, you have that plan or that goal, those
Mm,
goals you set for yourself, you can still get there. And
yeah.
it's when you get to that point where you're like, well, I'm just going to accept this, then you've again become non-intentional.
Yeah.
And
And it,
that's
and it doesn't have to be about getting a college degree. It could be maybe a vocational training or a certification, or just practicing your skills and your expertise to get it to the next level, which
right.
will open some opportunities for you. Or it could be on a personal side. Maybe that deliberateness or that intentionalness is about taking a trip with your family, or visiting family members, or spending more time with your family or your kids. There has to be that intentionality instead of just existing. I mean,
Right.
and maybe you, and I'm going to counter my own view, maybe you need to be intentional about not doing something for a little while. Maybe, you know, you had an illness, or there's a medical situation where you just need to be intentional about your recovery, and understanding that you need to shift that balance more towards yourself instead of work, so that you can make a complete and full recovery in a much quicker time than dragging it out much longer than it needs to for your own personal well-being. So, being intentional doesn't just have to be about your career, about work, or about the job that you do or the position that you're in. It can be on the personal side as well.
Right. And I want to caveat something, and then we've been talking about intentional and doing it purposefully and deliberate. But at the same time, we don't want to lose sight of not being intentional for everything.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of to your point with the family thing, that do you want to sit down at dinner and be intentional about, we got to eat dinner this way, we got to
Mhm.
In those cases, maybe not. You just say, "Hey, how's everybody doing today? Let's sit down and have a meal." I mean,
Yeah,
so I think we don't want to come over the top that everything in your life has to be intentional. It has to be planned out. It
right.
has to be,
Those
goals
sometimes
behind it.
surprises are nice.
Right. So I just don't want to mislead our viewers and listeners to think that everything has to be completely planned out every step,
Sure.
every day.
Well, and you
But
can't plan out everything to the minutia,
right,
because this thing called life has its way of doing what it wants
right,
anyways.
right,
No matter how much we've planned or how intentional we might be, life has a way of influencing, we'll say, influencing some
right.
of the things that we do or experience.
Right, because I think if we get really intentional and that's our only focus, I think we miss out, like you said, on life. Things that pop up and we don't take the time to smell the flowers.
Yeah.
We just and I'll really think about the trip. Living in California when I was in the military and coming back to the Midwest. Um, those were very intentional trips. It was
Mhm.
get in the car, drive as far as you can, as fast as you can. And so you limited, your stops, the
Yeah.
breaks, it's basically get out, stretch your legs, and get back in the car and go again. So, and I think back now that if we had really thought about it and took time to, enjoy some of the stops that we, took and maybe stay an extra day here or there, but in that situation, we were really intentional about getting home. And so
Yeah.
I just really think about, kind of your statement you just made about life and not enjoying that because the kids were, tiny, would have maybe had some fun doing different things. But yeah, like I said, just our goal was to get home as fast as possible. So that's the downside of the intentional piece. If you don't factor in some of those things that can be fun and enjoyable, and,
Yeah.
and are a needed distraction sometime. So, that's the other side of this is that, like I say, we've talked about being really intentional, but at the same time, we do realize that
You need
we
to be
also have to,
open. Yeah, you
yeah,
have to be open to that which we cannot control.
right, right. And so I just want to throw that in there because, like I said, we've been talking more about being deliberate, being
Mhm.
intentional about our direction and goals and things like that. But at the same time, we also have to take that time out to, embrace and enjoy and
Mhm.
have fun too. So I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah. And, unfortunately, over the last few years, there's been more company restructuring. There's been more layoffs due to the economic climate, and it's ebbing and flowing, maybe a little bit more than it normally has the past couple of decades. But how we respond to those situations when they happen, obviously being let go is not necessarily a deliberate or
Right,
intentional choice. Hey, I want to do something to be let go or laid off or terminated. Usually most people are wanting to be employed.
right,
So
right,
when those unexpected events occur, how we adapt to that new situation um, should have some intentionality behind it. I mean, there's obviously a period of time. They say that there's a few things in life that are major life events: getting married, having children, and getting a job, or getting or losing a job, or in the top 5 or 10 or something like that. So you know if someone does unexpectedly find themselves in a position of being unemployed, you and I have both been there,
right,
or been um, privy or part of an internal restructuring. Obviously that's not most people's first choice of fun activities.
right,
um, how do we adapt to that situation and be intentional about it without losing ourselves? And so with that, being intentional in a situation like that may be an opportunity in disguise. um, and what I mean by that is, maybe this is an opportunity for a new beginning, or a new functional position, or maybe it's a new time to reinvent yourself. I've talked to people who are like, and you and I have both been here, well, that's not really what I want to be doing. What I want to be doing is this. Okay, well, now is
Right.
an opportunity to do that. You can do it while you're working. There's some challenges with that, but there's also some
Right.
challenges with doing it when that's all you have time to do. So, being intentional about how you deal with an unexpected situation can be to your benefit or detriment, depending on how you address it or how you approach it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so that's that's a good point. I mean, like I mentioned before, being in a situation where I've been laid off, the company reorganized, they moved to a different location, all those things. And, I was able to overcome those things by intentionally going from in this particular case, I went from one industry as far as working to another industry and
Mhm.
back because that's what presented itself at that time. So being intentional about, okay, well, this is run its course. And they in a way helped me to redirect myself to something else. And then again, it happened 4 or 5 years later, and I went back to the other industry because of the same thing, that reorg happened or something like that. So you're right. There is an opportunity for you to reinvent yourself or go down a different path or change career fields or change, industries or whatever it
Or
is.
employers, or yeah,
And
just change
right, all those types of things.
geographic location.
Right,
It provides
right.
a lot of different opportunities.
Right. And that's actually what happened to us with the first one. Was it was, geographically changed from, one state to another, actually from the West Coast to the Midwest. But being able to do that and, you know, accepting, okay, this is the direction I need to go, and being intentional about, okay, now I have to make it work going down this path. Totally
Mhm.
different than what I've been doing for the past 10 years. But having that ability to, like you say, adapt to what's presented, you know, before me, and being able to jump into something else. So then being intentional about, okay, now I've got to change careers. And actually, when I did that, I actually started going to school to be more intentional about, okay, now I need to learn this industry and learn these things. And my plan was to go ahead and go down this path and then go to school for that.
Mhm.
But shortly after that, that position changed again. So I had
Right.
to readapt, readjust and change again. So yeah, just, and I think that goes back to also the flexibility piece,
Yeah.
that just being able to adapt to, you get intentional about one direction and then immediately that's changed again. Like I said before, the carpet's pulled off from under you and now you have to readjust. So
Mhm.
um yeah, just having
And
that
and
ability
that kind of
to,
piggybacks on the point that we've made in the past, and that's being open to and embracing change in some
right,
cases. Some folks don't like change, and that's normal. For a lot of people, we're human beings, and we typically tend to find ourselves working to a routine that's comfortable, and
right,
embracing change can be challenging. However, when something unexpected happens, I encourage people to embrace it as an opportunity,
right,
whatever that opportunity looks like, personal or
right,
professional, family or work. If you embrace it and start being intentional about your approach to it, it can make a huge difference on
absolutely,
the outcome, whether it's,
right,
whether you find yourself in a better position, a different position, it really, is up to you. It becomes, the adage, the world becomes your oyster at that point. It is a time to start over in some cases. And sometimes just making that conscious choice to be intentional can be the catalyst for opening many more doors.
right. Because I go back to, and I may have mentioned this before on one of our other episodes, but I heard this from a senior leader in the military years ago, and he had this phrase. He said, "You can either be the victim or the victor,"
Mhm.
and that's that opportunity for you, like you say, to jump on this, embrace it, and become a victor, rather than a victim and say, "Oh, woe is me. Why did this
Mhm.
happen to me?" But rather embrace it, move forward, and then, maybe lead to other opportunities. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, just having that ability, and to really think even if, things don't go as planned, still having that ability to embrace it, to accept it, and then be intentional about, improving, making it to the next level. And I think that's really what we've been trying to say, for the past um, half an hour or so we've been on talking about this topic, is just being intentional about your decisions, and not just sitting back waiting for things to happen. And like I say, for me, it was that 40-year-old self, or that, midlife crisis self, or whatever it was. It took me to really become intentional about what I wanted to do with my future. And it's led to, so many different things,
Yeah.
because now I'm preparing for the future. I'm looking at the future. I'm seeing the potential for where all this can take me. But it wasn't until, I started becoming really intentional about my future. And so,
Yeah, and I'll throw one more thing on there for us to just briefly talk about as we kind of start winding down. And that's, you know, being intentional in a situation is also an opportunity for a great opportunity for self-reflection, you
oh,
know,
absolutely.
deliberate
Yes.
self-reflection and critical self-reflection to
Yeah.
say, hey, what do I really want to be doing, or where do I really want to be in this present moment? Where do I really want to be and be doing? And we don't have the answers to that because that's a very subjective answer, but you know it does provide, being in a situation that you're not sure about and becoming intentional is a great opportunity to self-reflect, to figure out, is this where I want to be, is this what I want to
Right.
be doing? If it's yes, then that's great. If it's not, then this is your opportunity to really make some of those changes that you want to happen. So in the
Right.
last few minutes, any final thoughts, Joe, on that or anything else we've talked about?
Again, we've said it over and over again, about being intentional. I mean, for me, I think back to, um, and I relate this to other people as well, especially younger people. When I think about, if I was, intentional when I was a 17-year-old kid about my military career. And again, I know we all don't know what we want to do when we grow up at that age at
Right.
all. But I just think about, if I was more intentional about why I joined the military, what can I gain from this experience? If I just think about, and again, I don't discount my life, the path that I've taken, and the long scenic route, because I wouldn't be
Right.
who I am today without it. But I also think about, being more intentional about some of those things, how maybe I could have been to this level a lot sooner, and
Mhm.
that's what I think about when I became intentional at 19 years in the military. That's why I stayed till I was 30, almost 35 years in, because I realized, man, I had so much to offer, so much to give in this,
Mhm.
military career and environment. And so that's why, I started to feel it. I started to really, achieve and be the best person I could be during that time. And so I just, again, would encourage people, I know, like I say, we don't want you to have this fully life mapped out until are in the grave. But we would, like for you to really think about what's next, even if it's just the next thing, being really intentional about that, whether it's, your work, career, your personal life, just
Mhm.
really taking the time, like Dave said, to self-reflect, set some goals. And I think you'll realize that and you mentioned it, the world is your oyster. It can be, if you're
Mhm.
really intentional about, where you want to go, where you want to end up. So
Yeah.
um, that's where I'll end it.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that, Joe. It kind of, the last few comments you made kind of reminded me of, you hear about all the rags to riches stories and, success stories. And it's like, you don't have to be in rags right now. And if you are, this again, an opportunity. So yeah, it's just be intentional and think about what you want to do when you grow up. So we're still thinking about that ourselves. We
Oh,
talk about it every
absolutely.
week. We're like, what do we
Absolutely.
want to do when we grow up? Well, I don't know.
Right.
This podcast. Yeah, let's do a podcast. So with on that note, I'd like to thank our listeners and viewers for tuning in again. We really appreciate your viewership. If you like what we have to say, hit like and share with your network and your friends and family and coworkers. Where, we really like to share what we have with others, and as many as possible. On that note, thank you for joining us for another episode of Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. Keep on being your not so ordinary you.